Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. On April 15th, 2 bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring more than 170 others. U.S. President Barack Obama, about 24 hours later, called the bombings an act of terrorism. Joining us today is Rohan Gunaratne. He's the head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research with NTU RSIS in Singapore. He is also the author of the book Inside Al-Qaeda. Gunaratne, Rohan, will start talking about the Boston Marathon bombings, and we'll move on ahead to look at this eventful 48 hours in the United States. Welcome to Rappler, Rohan.
Thank you.
Rohan, what did you think when the Boston bombings happened?
It was a very significant terrorist attack because after 9/11, America did not suffer from a significant terrorist attack. We identify the Boston attack as an act of terrorism for 3 reasons. One is it was indiscriminate. They used explosives, killed even a child. Second is that the target, they were civilians. And third is that it was on a very symbolic day. It was on the first day of America's Revolutionary War, on Patriots' Day, and they identified, the terrorists identified the most prestigious marathon in the world. In fact, it's the world's oldest marathon. So considering these 3 factors, it is a very clear indication of a terrorist attack, although the group has not yet been identified.
Correct. Well, first, why did the United States, why did it take so long to determine the difference between whether or not it was a criminal act or a terrorist attack? Why did it take President Obama almost 24 hours?
It is because the United States did not have intelligence before the attack. So it was a total surprise. And I can share with you that any successful terrorist attack is an intelligence failure because governments spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars to prevent a terrorist attack. After 9/11, it's a huge investment, especially by the Western nations. And yet they were not able, and there was no indication whatsoever of a terrorist attack.
Correct. From what's been released right now, the FBI says that it looked like at least one of the IEDs was a pressure cooker. It was full of ball bearings, metal shrapnel that was designed. Based on this, tell us, what is the significance of these elements, and then who could be behind this?
The origins of the pressure cooker bomb is from Pakistan. That is where Al-Qaeda and their associated groups have operated. But I also want to tell you that there are other right-wing groups that have used similar techniques. So it's too early to conclude as to who did this attack. But I personally believe that the United States is very close now towards discovering who the perpetrators are, because they were able to positively identify the 2 people who planted the devices, and they have just released the pictures. In the next 24 hours, I believe that the US will be able to conclusively say the group and the individuals responsible for this attack.
How does an investigation like this go? So you said now that they've released the photos, they'd be able to identify it and that they're close to the end. But how do you know this? What's the normal process for something like this?
They will use 2 principal methods. One is they will use forensics, that is investigation. Second is they will generate intelligence, because the US has a huge capacity to check, for example, visual intelligence, VISINT,
Correct.
CCTV. They were able to identify who carried the devices.
Correct.
So they will use both these methods now to generate intelligence, and they will use investigation, the tools they have to identify who did this attack, who is responsible, who is behind it, who communicated to them, who supported them.
When you said that every terrorist attack is an intelligence failure, you know, it's been roughly 48 hours and they've already identified 2 men. In fact, they released the video and the photos of these men, asking Americans to identify them for it. Why did it fail?
It is because the United States has been largely oriented towards detecting the threat to the US from overseas, not the threat to the United States from within. And we have seen that 9/11 in many ways is an exception. Almost all the plots that have been discovered in the United States were by cells that were radicalized by extremist ideologies.
When you said radicalized, extremist ideologies, Islamist terrorism or right-wing ideology, like the Waco, Texas, for example?
Right now we are seeing 4 categories of groups operating in the United States. One is the politico-religious groups. So the Islamist groups will fall into that category. Second is the ethno-political groups. Third is the left-wing groups. And fourth is the right-wing groups. There's a very small category of single-issue groups. These are the environmental groups that use violence. But in this instance, the 2 principal ideologies and the 2 principal groups that have been identified as likely perpetrators, they are the right-wing groups and the politico-religious groups.
It's been a very eventful 48 hours after the Boston bombings. We had 2 letters filled with ricin, with traces of ricin, one to a U.S. legislator, the other to President Barack Obama. And then after that, you had the fertilizer explosion in West Texas that killed people and was a massive fireball just a day before the 20th anniversary of the Waco incident. And then today we have shootings, a shooting at MIT and explosions in MIT. You could say, I mean, how do you look at all of this? I'm not going to put words in your mouth there. Why are these happening in the last 48 hours?
It is possible at least 2 of these incidents are related. It is also very likely that the ricin attack is by a terrorist group, because terrorist groups have used ricin before very successfully, and also these groups have expressed an interest to use ricin since 9/11 more frequently, and several attempts have been disrupted. And with regard to the most recent developments in MIT, in Boston, the operations are still continuing. In fact, right now the police are very active. So I believe that this is the single biggest crisis phase for the United States after 9/11 in terms of detecting, disrupting, containing threats.
What does this mean for countries outside the United States? For the Philippines, for example, a U.S. ally?
Threat of terrorism is the most significant threat. In fact, it is the tier 1 national security threat even for the Philippines. But Philippines itself is very secure compared to what it was 10 years ago, because the MILF has entered the peace process. Of course, there are 3 factions, Cato, Bravo, and the area that was controlled by the late Mimbantas, that is trying to break away or broken away.
Right.
And Abu Sayyaf itself is reduced very significantly in strength and size. Raja Suleiman has been totally disrupted. Of course, the communist insurgents are still quite active. So there are threats. But I believe that the government's ability to enter into peace negotiations with Haji Murad is the single biggest breakthrough, because southern Philippines was used by so many foreign terrorists and a few groups that are active in this region. Number of terrorists arrived here from Pakistan, from the Middle East. So the peace talks, the structured peace negotiations with the MILF has yielded tremendous success, and this needs to be sustained so that the south of the Philippines will be a hostile area for these foreign elements. This is a major breakthrough. I think the president and also Haji Murad needs to be congratulated. Unlike Hashim Salamat, who flirted with various terrorist groups, Haji Murad has been very committed towards saying no to Jamaah Islamiyah, saying no to Abu Sayyaf, and saying no to other foreign financiers, trainers, tacticians that came to give life, another lease of life for these dying terrorist groups in the south of the Philippines.
Those groups that came from the outside were all groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda itself, correct?
Certainly, and there was Al-Qaeda funding.
Yes.
Hashim Salamat admitted to that. With regard to JI, there are very significant operatives of JI that came here. Some are in custody, others have been killed, and some have run away, like Dul Matin, and he was subsequently killed, and of course Umar Patek, who went from the Philippines to Indonesia, returned to Indonesia, and then traveled to Pakistan through Bangkok. He was captured in the same city where Bin Laden was living, in Abbottabad.
It's been more than a decade since 9/11, though, since the peak of Al-Qaeda's strength. How would you define, how do you look at Al-Qaeda today?
Al-Qaeda was a group of about 3,000 fighters at 9/11. Bin Laden was its leader. But today the leader has been killed, and numerical strength of Al-Qaeda is less than 200 fighters. But again, on the Afghan-Pakistan border, there are about 15,000 terrorists, mostly Afghan Taliban, Pakistani Taliban, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Islamic Jihad Union, Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement, number of those groups that are operating. Once the Americans leave Afghanistan, these groups will go back to Afghanistan. They will reconstitute the sanctuary in Afghanistan. That will pose a threat to Southeast Asia, because there were about 400 terrorists from Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, that went to Afghanistan and received training. So we hope that Afghanistan will not become a sanctuary again, because if it does that, there will be Filipinos, Indonesians, Malaysians, Singaporeans, Thai, Malays in the south of Thailand going to Afghanistan, and when they return, they will want to relive their experience, meaning they will do terrorist attacks.
Hasn't the world learned from Afghanistan the first time around in 1989, the post-Soviet Afghanistan, and now the American troops, U.S.-led coalition, it's supposed to pull out by 2014, correct? We've known this for about a year. Are countries around the world preparing for this possibility?
There should be extraordinary effort, extraordinary leadership on the part of Asian countries now to come together to stabilize Afghanistan. They should not allow terrorism to return back to Afghanistan. If that happens, certainly the neighboring countries will suffer, but not only the neighborhood, but Afghanistan will be used as a staging base to attack China, to attack India, to attack Pakistan, to attack Iran, and also to mount attacks against the West, against Southeast Asia. So I think that the leaders should wake up to this challenge and ensure that the US-led Western coalition is replaced in Afghanistan. The Americans have been defeated in Afghanistan. In Iraq also they were defeated. If an army cannot win, if an army is checkmate, it is very clear that those armies have been defeated. Right now the US position is that they are going to leave a training team, advisory team, special operators team,
yes,
and drone team. These are insufficient to fight the militants who are on the Pakistan side of the Afghan border. You need boots on the ground, meaning there has to be another configuration that has to be worked out, not only by the Americans, but by other countries, to stabilize Afghanistan.